Good morning and welcome to the Forum at St. Bart's, where each week we explore issues at the intersection of faith and the modern world. I'm Peter Thompson, the Associate Rector for Formation and Liturgy here. I'm joined today by our Rector, Bishop Dean Wolfe, and on this Memorial Day weekend by the Right Reverend Carl Wright, the Episcopal Church's Bishop Suffragan for the Armed Forces and Federal Ministries. As part of Bishop Wright's work, he oversees Episcopal chaplains and congregations within the Department of Defense, the Department of Veterans Affairs, and the Federal Bureau of Prisons. Prior to being elected bishop, Bishop Wright had a long career in both the military and in parish ministry. Dean, I'll hand it over to you to more fully introduce Bishop Wright.
Well, it's just great to have you here, Carl. We've been friends for some 30 years now. We were both at Virginia Theological Seminary together, and it was my great joy to be able to vote for Carl in the House of Bishops to take on this enormous job that he has now. And it's particularly wonderful to have you here on this Memorial Day weekend when we remember the sacrifices of so many people in the armed forces. Welcome.
Thank you.
So Bishop Wright, why don't you start by telling us about your role as a person between the church and the military and what your job involves?
Thank you, Peter. I would like to say, before I forget to say, the most important thing I'm going to say this morning is many thanks to Father Peter and to Bishop Dean Wolfe for this opportunity to speak to St. Bart's. This, of course, is a little unusual in that I cannot see your faces, but I will assume that the Holy Spirit will guide us in our chat with each other this morning, this Sunday morning of Memorial Day weekend. And I'll just say a couple of words about my unique ministry within the Episcopal Church. So as Peter says, long duty title, job title, Bishop for Armed Forces and Federal Ministries, which of course includes a lot. And then there's a little more to the story. There's that little expression that most of us are familiar with that says, and also all other duties as assigned. So this historically, this Armed Forces Bishop position, which goes back to 1964, and I'm still trying to research to figure out how is it that at the very time, the height of the Vietnam and the Tet Offensive, the Episcopal Church made the decision to create an Armed Forces Bishop. Those two things somehow don't match, but our church does many things frequently that don't match. I think, and it turned out to be a brilliant move. We have, oh my goodness, over 800 military installations, American military installations throughout this world. And usually I give a little sermon about how that means we're actually an empire, although we would never use that word. So I didn't say that. Over 800 installations. We have approximately 1.5 million active military people who represent this nation: Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, Coast Guard, and now the United States Space Force. You may have seen me blessing the Holy Bible in the National Cathedral for the new Space Force about a year ago. And I would love to say I got a lot of praises for doing so, but it was the exact opposite. I did not. I got a lot of condemnation, but once again, that's another sermon I'll give you some other time. And I would say very, very sincerely that one of the main reasons I'm here is that I believe in the mission of the church. And there's probably no bishop of all these beautiful, intelligent people we have in the House of Bishops. There's probably no other bishop except myself who is literally a missionary bishop. So, or sometimes I call myself the flying bishop. I flail my arms and I say I'm the flying bishop because I go all over the world, spreading the gospel, teaching the faith, baptizing babies, confirming soldiers and military members. And my number one job is the spiritual care of our outstanding chaplains. We barely have 150 military chaplains who are Episcopal priests, in the military. On the other hand, I like to use a fighting expression in the fighting world. Sometimes they'll say, he's only a lightweight, but his reach, I can't remember the rest of it, but his reach is far. And that is the God in heaven's truth about this ministry in the Episcopal Church. We may be fewer in numbers than many of our American Christian denominations, but our reach is very, very high and very, very far, having a lot to do with our illustrious heritage, which goes all the way back to colonial times. So that's in a nutshell what the Episcopal Church ordained me to do. Very happy to be here this morning, and I know that there are going to be questions, and so I'm steeling my nerves and I'm open to you. Thank you.
Well, Carl, I'll start off with a question because people will often tell me that we should be more supportive of men and women in the armed forces. And as Episcopalians, often our theological positions seem to sometimes be more at odds with some of our positions in terms of the military. How can we be more supportive of men and women serving all around the world, often in harm's way? What kinds of things should average parishioners, average Americans be doing?
Needless to say, Bishop Dean, that question is not unheard of, but it's not one that I can easily answer because we're talking mainly about military institutions. There are barriers and there are rules and there are Department of Defense regulations and that sort of thing, which sort of, the reason why I bring that up first is because that hampers or it impedes access to our active duty folks in particular. But that's not an excuse. I have seen, one good thing about the travels is I have somewhat of a panoramic view of the Episcopal Church. And so one thing I'm seeing, that the model that's really working, and sometimes it's dioceses, most times it's cardinal parishes, will form a sort of a Veterans Affairs Committee of the parish, or something like that, or a military committee of the parish. And I want to say, Dean, while it's true that Episcopalians have wide variety and disagree on many things, I have yet to hear an Episcopalian who is not in favor of military ministry and veterans ministry. Praise God for that. Because the work that these people do, I think all of us understand that the work that they do guarantees our freedoms and our rights, and it is the American military that undergirds what we do and allows us to enjoy the lifestyle and the freedoms that we enjoy. I have to hammer that point because I think sometimes we forget about that. But I think we should remember that always. So back to the idea of a committee or a commission or something, and particularly something I've seen that works is for some strange reason, and I've got to do more research to figure this out, outside the front gates of most of our largest military installations, regardless of pardon me, I had surgery, so sometimes I can't retrieve the words I want. But regardless of branch of service, we frequently have Episcopal churches, little Episcopal churches with red doors, right outside the main gate of military installations. And that's not something new. I mean, these are, like neo-Gothic churches that have been there 150 years kind of thing. And and no other denomination that I know of lays claim to that. I believe that has something to do with the missionary history and the missionary orientation of the Episcopal Church over these centuries that we have these churches. And so there again, that's something that I could envision a more prosperous parish like, say, BART'S, could join hands with that little Episcopal church with the red doors that's right outside a military installation that has thousands of soldiers there. So those are just my ideas, but not to be negative, but because of DoD regulations and because of the regulations of the individual branches of the service, our actual access is not prohibited, but it is kind of limited, because think of all the denominations we have in the Episcopal Church. Everybody would want to be storming the gates, please join my church kind of thing. So
thank you.
I'll stop there. Yeah.
Thanks.
Bishop Wright, I know that you were a military chaplain for decades, and I'm sure that over that time you ministered to service members who were dying and to family members of service members who had died. And so I'm curious what your reflections are on this and every Memorial Day, about the sacrifice that these service members made, and how we can best honor their sacrifice.
Yes. Every every Memorial Day weekend since 2004 or 5, I get a little melancholy going, because I think about all of the people whose deaths I have attended, and all of the people I've ministered to in a variety of places, in Iraq and in Bosnia, Herzegovina and Kosovo and all of these. So if you just think about all of our little conflicts that we've been involved with over the past 30 years, the odds are I was probably there. I was sharing with Peter before we started this conversation, I was sharing with him that I am a single Episcopal priest. And so the military has learned how to use that greatly to their advantage. So I feel like I've had way more experiences than the average chaplain, if I may, if for no other reason, because of being single. Think about it. I am more portable, more available at a moment's notice and that kind of thing. So I would say of the variety of messes I've gotten myself into, the one that really continues to stand out and weigh on my heart was I was the head chaplain of a military hospital. Just think of MASH and what that looked like in Iraq. And this was around the time that they were about to approve, the Iraqis were about to approve their brand new constitution, which of course we assisted in, not me personally, but I mean, America did. And also it was around the time that they finally found Saddam hiding in a hole and that sort of thing. So a big skirmish happened just outside our base and inside our base and our hospital. And just, soldier after soldier after soldier I was walking around giving last rites to, and there was one particular soldier who the medical people would always say to me, chaplain, pray for this one, chaplain, go, take care of this guy, take care of that girl, that kind of thing. And I went to this one young man who had this profound look of loneliness on his face, or it was a look that I felt like it turns out he was 19 years old. This 19-year-old boy, he had a look that almost seemed to me like, why did I do this? How did I get myself in this situation? I know I'm going to die and I'm afraid. He didn't have to say a word, and he didn't, but I could just see all of that in his face. And so in spite of all that was going on around us, I just knew intuitively that what the Lord wanted me to do was to stay with him. Oh, I forgot to tell you, by the time he came to us, he had no limbs. They'd all been shot off. And to stay with him, and I held him until he died. That is not an unusual story for military chaplains. So when we come to Memorial Day, of course, it's with a slightly heavy heart. And think of how many years ago that was, but I can see it as plain as day. I no longer see your face at this moment, Peter. I see that young man who gave his life for this country.
Such a powerful story. How can we best honor his legacy?
I feel like our country has come a long way. When I first came in the service, I wasn't a chaplain, I was an enlisted man, 1978 to 1983. And when I first came into the service, we were still recovering from the Vietnam era. So it was a very unpopular job to have. And frankly, a lot of people, people love to make a joke about the judge who says to the young man who's a criminal that your days of being a criminal are over with, and either you join the army or we're putting you in jail. Well, I have served side by side with many people like that in previous decades, but things have changed. And now people greet us warmly, especially if we're in uniform. People will get up and let us have their seat in first class. It's really weird to me that I've lived long enough to see that where previously we were looked down upon and considered stupid, and nowadays we're almost considered like saints. People just, in the shopping mall will say, thank you for serving our country. So I always advise my chaplains that if you're a true student of history, you will take heed and realize that, the pendulum swings two ways. So don't get too comfortable.
The ministry you do as in federal ministries is, I think, probably less understood. Say just a little bit more about the number of institutions that Episcopal chaplains serve
Okay.
beyond the military.
Okay. I'll start. I want to start with one that is not even officially acknowledged, and that's the I call them the healthcare chaplains, who, as you all might imagine, are really on the front line, or have been on the front lines for the past year and a half. Well, we have nearly 2,000 Episcopal priests who are professional CPE trained healthcare chaplains throughout this country. So that's one constituency. Then we have the smaller groups are the federal prison ministry and then the Veterans Administration Ministry. And I must say, I want to say this before I forget again, is that they are, they are intermingled. All of these, they may have very specific duty. One of my favorite hymns says, "A charge to keep I have, a God to glorify." Well, so they may have very specific charges, but I'll give you an example. Our Veterans Administration chaplains are most typically retired active duty chaplains who were on active duty in the military for 20 years. And of course, they have all of that experience. They have all the accreditation, and most importantly, they know the culture. So there's definitely these ministries are not totally segregated one from another. And so, yes, I would say in my portfolio, the largest would be the healthcare folks, and then the military chaplains, and then the prisons, and then the Veterans Administration. So once again, I see it as my primary job description item is to get around and see all of these folks. I think if I were Armed Forces Bishop for 20 years, I probably would never get to every single one of these fine missionaries, if you will.
I do encourage you, if you have questions for Bishop Wright, to send them in. You can use the live chat function on YouTube, the comments function on Facebook, or you can email me, pthompson@stbarts.org. That's PTHOMPSON@STBARTS.org. We do have some questions already.
Oh, mercy me.
The first question is from one of our parishioners, Wendy Nichols. And she mentions that her dad was a chaplain who was killed in Vietnam. And so we remember and honor his service on this Memorial Day. Yes. She mentions that her dad would leave the landing zone to join troops in the bush to lead services. And she wonders, how do modern chaplains do their work? Are they in the fighting zones today as well?
Yeah. Yes, Wendy, the chaplaincy does not change. I mean, all the way back to General George Washington, who appointed the first military chaplains. It does not change. That image of a chaplain jumping off a helicopter in a battle zone just to take the Eucharist or to bring the word of God to troops continues to this very day, no doubt.
We have another question about you and the hard job that you have and how you receive support and comfort, as well as how do other military chaplains who interact with so much pain, how do they ensure that they are cared for themselves?
Well, not easily. I think this is something all of us in ordained ministry share, is that, and I'm going to put this crudely, if we believe that we're called by God to do what we're doing. And so if we believe that with all of our heart, that will oftentimes mean we can't, I hate the expression, take care of number one. Well, we can't always take care of number one at the expense of the people whom God has sent our way to be shepherded. Now, of course, neither should we be foolish and sacrifice our health and well-being, because then we would, if for no other reason, we would not be effective shepherds of God's people. So there is a line, and it's not always easy to find where that line is. But I have always felt, ever since I can remember, that the main mission of a priest, and remember, a bishop is also a priest and a deacon, the main ministry of the priest is to take care of God's people in any way that we can.
Another person mentions a book study we've been doing the past few weeks here at St. Bart's on the wounds of Jesus, specifically pointing out that the resurrected body of Jesus has wounds. And this person wonders what kind of ministry you and a fellow chaplains do to those who have wounds, wounded active duty personnel as well as wounded veterans. How do you minister to their wounds, whether those wounds are visible or not?
Yeah, to be totally honest, I would say, the, we can't heal people. We're not physicians. There's so many things we can't do, but the most important thing we can do, like my little story I told you in Iraq, the most important thing we can do is to hold somebody in Jesus' name. The most important thing we can do is to walk alongside people sharing their burdens and their hurts and their pains. Let me say to all of you who are listening that we're so privileged as Americans in so many ways, but one of them that's near and dear to my heart is that chaplains have what we call privilege. We have privileged communication. And what that means is, according to the Department of Defense and every other department of our federal government, is that what people say to the chaplain stays with the chaplain. And we guard that right tenaciously because, once again, that means that we can do a service to those who are serving. We can do a service that nobody else can do. And we don't say that arrogantly. We say that humbly and with gratitude to God that we can make a difference in people's lives. But by the way, the stigmata are a very, very important part of my devotional life. And so I was glad, I smiled when you said that you guys have been reading a book about those wounds. Because Lord knows all of us, all just as all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, and all of us we're wounded. It's just that in the case of persons like myself, we're wounded healers, I guess.
Does your ministry ever involve critique of the military or the government? And what might that involve? A questioner is sort of wondering if the military industrial complex has become too big.
Yes. The President Eisenhower is the one who famously, and I mean, he had every right to, he had been a 5-star general. When it was time for him to step down as president, in that speech, his farewell speech, he argued against a military industrial complex, he called it. I think he coined the phrase, and how that would be not a detriment to the people that we serve, that is a detriment to our own selves and to our institutions if we don't care for it gingerly and carefully. I'm sorry, what was the question associated with the military industrial complex? Oh, are we allowed to critique? Yes, that's, being totally honest with you, that is expected. I hope everybody knows that, like in these federal systems, there is, of course, some kind of strict hierarchy. That's it's more of a hierarchy than the Episcopal Church has. So we can critique, but it must be done in the right way. It cannot be done arrogantly. We cannot disrespect our chain of command. When we want to right in a wrong, the most appropriate thing to do is to go to the next higher person on the totem pole, and that kind of thing. And remember, most of our chaplains, not to sound arrogant, but we are professionals. So in our various chaplaincies, we get promotions and things like that. So what I'm leading up to is a higher ranking chaplain in the VA or in a federal prison or on a military base or in a hospital. A higher ranking chaplain is more positioned to be more confrontational or able to critique more, because that person has more experience, first of all, and also because that person, quite frankly, is more valuable to the system and can be heard in a way that others can. My present position, I am amazed and befuddled. I don't understand why things that I say are actually respected by the military, but frequently they are.
In a similar vein, we have a question about the relationship between military chaplaincy and Christian pacifism. Jesus says, "Those who live by the sword die by the sword." As someone who has spent his career between these two spaces, how do you explain the call to be peacemakers as well as alongside the call to serve in the military?
Well, that question is so easy. I could answer it in like 1 or 2 sentences. And I don't mean to be flippant, but once again, one of the blessings of being American is that chaplains are by definition pacifists. So chaplains do not bear arms. You know, it's a miracle that we're allowed to wear uniforms and have rank and get paid by the federal government. It's a miracle, because our main job, again, is that confidentiality, that privileged communication. And so, yes, we are, by definition, by regulation, we're the only commissioned officers, if you will, who are legally pacifists. That is, to give you an example of how true that is if you're on the battlefield, if you're in Iraq or Afghanistan, and a chaplain would grab an M16 to defend himself or herself, that chaplain would be disciplined and probably kicked out of the service. Chaplains do not bear arms. Chaplains are non-combatants. So we serve, and we serve everybody, pacifists, everybody from pacifists to, you know, one of the largest religious groups of all the 1.5 million people serving in uniform. I think it's something like the 3rd or 4th largest religious group is no religious preference, NRP, which makes our work even more challenging and that sort of thing. So that's how I'd answer that question.
Carl, do you find that somehow over the years since we were in seminary, we've gotten older? I don't know how that happened exactly, but do you find there are differences in this next generation of younger people serving in the military?
I find that there are differences, and I can recognize them, and I can expound on them. And then every now and again, I will have conversations with chaplains who are much older than I am. And here comes my pendulum theory again, is some of the things that I would like to complain about our young folks in the military. People who are a generation ahead of me will sort of remind me, oh, Carl, you know, that's nothing new. Now, that said, I think the thing about no religious preference, that is something new. And I don't think that needs a whole lot of explaining. I love to tell people that if you just think of our American military as America in microcosm, that is to say, everything, and I do mean everything, you have in the general population, you will have at least a sprinkling of in the military. That's one of the things that makes the military so rich and so effective, I would argue. the issue about no religious preference and meeting young people on the battlefield who have never been in a church and have no, as many claim to be atheist, how it is an adolescent person actually knows that they're atheists is beyond me. But people, you know, when you're ministering with people like that, you set all of that aside, and it's our common humanity and our common desire to serve that keeps us together.
Thank you.
We have a question about your thoughts about the civilian oversight of the military, the fact that, you know, a civilian can decide where thousands of 19-year-olds are going and what wars they'll be fighting.
Yeah, I hope I'm not coming off sounding like I'm you know, I'm an agent of the state, and that, you know, the everything the United States does is perfect. I definitely do not pretend to say that, but this is yet another issue that I really believe is ingenious. Whoever thought of it, you know, one or two of our founding fathers decided on this civilian oversight over what was then called the standing army. To me, it makes perfectly good sense, because we can see, especially, I love to say, we Episcopalians, our true religion isn't really Christianity. Our true religion is National Public Radio. And that's one of the things we talk about at coffee hour is, you know, what we heard on NPR. I'm just being a little silly there, but is that look at these countries where the military has arbitrarily, you know, done a coup and just taken over for no apparent reason other than they don't like the person who's in the seat. That literally cannot happen here. Knock on wood. That literally cannot happen here, precisely because we have a civilian oversight, and B, the what do you call that thing about the three branches of government are co-equal and look out for one another. So I think overall, I think it's a good thing. And yes, it does have the potential of going wrong, but name me any human endeavor that does not have the potential of going wrong.
Bishop, I was reading about the origins of Memorial Day, and correct me if I'm wrong, but they date to this post-Civil War era. And there were remembrances of Union soldiers as well as Confederate soldiers. And I'm curious, in the past few years, we've been undergoing this huge racial reckoning within our larger society. Has that been taking place within the military as well?
Yes, it has. I want to respond to when everything got started. Memorial Day actually got started with the Confederate States of America. And it's important to me to mention that, because somehow I am definitely a student of American history and a student of the presidency and all that. It seems to me that religious fervor, religious expression has always been like more prominent in the South than it is in the North. It seems to me, and this is a gross generalization, but it seems to me that over these 2.5 centuries, the northern states are much more discreet about their faith. Some would say more balanced. I don't know, but I'm just saying there is a difference. And so it is no coincidence, it's no surprise that the idea of remembering our gallant war dead started. And you're right, it was a Civil War. It wasn't after, it was during the Civil War. It started. And remember now, President Lincoln was himself from the South. You know, his family heritage was Virginia and Kentucky. And so I imagine President Lincoln said, well, I think that's a good idea. And then it ballooned to what we have now. It actually became absolutely a national holiday in 1971. So that would have been Richard Milhous Nixon. Now, to the racial, again, of course, we have many deep-seated racial problems. We have a racist history in the American military, but not the same as in the civilian world, because the military has so many constraints. You know, for example, you cannot speak ill of the President of the United States, who is the commander-in-chief of the military. You can't do that, in any way, shape, or form. Now, coming back to Black people and the military, there are some instances where Black war heroes, all the way back to the Revolutionary War, would be buried in a colored or Negro cemetery back home where they came from. And then that kind of evolved to, if you go to Arlington National Cemetery, or most of our national cemeteries, of course, make no distinction about whether the deceased, what their race was. They served this country, they get buried in a national cemetery. Let me note here, forgive me, I cannot remember his name, but our brand new chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, so that means this gentleman is the highest ranking military person in the United States, is a Black man. And I cannot believe how far we have come in race relations, that of course, General Colin Powell, a faithful Episcopalian, was JCS chair. But this gentleman is more of activist type of leader. And so within this past year, within sometime in late 2020, he commanded that all of the main branches of the military form task forces. I'm just using the term task force, and to take another look at what's going on with race in the military nowadays. I'll say one more thing. The US Army is by far, has by far the greatest, highest number of African-American people in uniform, by far. And of course, the Army is the largest of all the services. So that's a cultural blessing, I would say.
We're not going to be able to answer all the questions we have, but I'll try to fit in at least two more.
I can't believe we have so many.
We do. There's a lot of interest and enthusiasm for you, Bishop Wright.
We may need to cut this in half. And, yeah.
There's a question. You talked about NRPs, but there are also a number of faith differences, both within Christianity and between Christianity and other faiths within the military. How does a chaplain in an active zone respond to all of these different faith differences and minister to service members across faith differences?
Well, let me tell you, when we become chaplains, and like most professions, graduate from the little chaplain school, we get issued a coveted item, and that item is called the chaplain's kit. And there must be at least 5 different versions of the the chaplain's kit, which represents the major faith groups, the DoD calls them, the major faith groups of the American military. So that would be Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, those major faith groups. I'm leaving out a couple. And then Roman Catholic and Orthodox are, although we know they're Christian, but they fall under. So there is a different chaplain's kit for each and every one of those major faith groups I just mentioned, which I think is ingenious. And really, it's only needed on the battlefield. It's needed where people are dying and sick and so forth. In addition to that, everywhere I've been, in my cargo pocket, I love this, on one cargo pocket on my left leg, I carry a small field Bible and the Book of Common Prayer that the Book of Common Prayer for the Armed Forces, because both of those items were published in such a way that you can walk or run with them on your left leg. On my right leg, I'd carry little laminated cards that it turns out that at least the three Abrahamic faiths, Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, have very specific things we do when somebody is dying. Well, I have a summary of those things on my little laminated cards so that whoever I minister to, I may not be able to speak their language of origin, but at a minimum, I can pray with them in a way that is familiar to them, knowing full well that that may be the last thing they'll hear on this earth.
A final question, since the draft was eliminated a few decades ago, more and more Americans don't know someone personally who's in the military or who has been in the military recently. Is there something to be said for a universal service requirement for young adults? Is that something you would advocate for? And what are other ways in which we can be more in touch with the idea of serving our nation?
That's two questions. I want you to read the first one first, because I slightly disagree with that premise. What did you say, Peter?
About fewer Americans have kind of direct contact with the military.
Okay, stop right there. I would say, my figure of nearly 1.5 million, our American military is now larger than it has ever been since since colonial time. The person who posed the question, you're absolutely correct about. You're correct about. We haven't had a World War II since World War II. And the reason why people knew somebody, or, my father and his 4 brothers, all 5 of them went to war in World War II, is because enough time has passed that instead of having these great wars like World War I and World War II, we have these little mini wars that never seem to end. And so the need for more and more manpower and woman power is far greater. So I'm just trying to say to the person who posed the question, while it is true that it is not in the cultural, and it's not in our cultural memory like it would have been in the 50s and the 60s, the whole reason why we had such virulent opposition to Vietnam is because all of those people knew about World War II and how damningly destructive it was. And so now another 3 generations have passed, and I do lament that we don't have enough people young people to serve, who know about that, unless they just read about it in a history book. But again, I insist, our military industrial complex, if you will, is far larger and far more lethal now than it's ever been. Part 1. All right, part 2.
Part 2 is, should there be a universal service requirement for young adults?
Oh my Lord, yes. I think about that a lot, and and it doesn't have to be military. As John Fitzgerald Kennedy endlessly pointed out, there's more than one way of serving. That's why he created the Peace Corps. That's why we have Episcopal Service Corps, Young People's Service Corps in the Episcopal Church. There's so many different ways. So if I were king for a day, or president for a day, I would, by executive order, issue an order that all young people must serve this country for 1 year, before entering college. But maybe that's why they would never put me in a position like that.
Well, we are over, and it's almost time for worship. Dean, do you have a final question or word you have?
No, I'll just say I'll add my thanks to the people who see you in malls and airports and say, Bishop Wright, thank you for your service to Christ and the church. Thank you for your service to our country. And we look forward to having you come back and visit St. Bart's in person. Take care.
Thank you so much, Bishop Dean. A pleasure to see you. God bless St. Bart's.
Thank you so much, Bishop Wright. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you for worship at 11 a.m.